So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to National Coaching Week, hosted by Coaching York. I'm going to give you a very, very quick introduction to Coaching York, for those of you not familiar with it. We're a social enterprise. We've got somewhere between 75 and 80 members, depending what day of the week we happen to be on. Things that people value about Coaching York as a membership network is the mutual support we provide to each other through things like this, CPD opportunities, mentoring opportunities. We run a podcast, which you can find on our website, coachingyork.co.uk. We also put together teams of coaches, which do work on a pro bono basis and also on a commercial basis. And one of the great advantages in having such a broad membership is that we're able to put together teams who are appropriate for the task or the issue that people would actually like us to deal with. So if you need to know more about that, you can contact me via our website, or you can just see what we're up to. Just to say, our mission as Coaching York is to extend the reach of coaching so that more people can experience coaching and live its benefits. So today, you will have an experience and hopefully you'll be able to live out the benefits from it. So I'll just hand over to Bryony, who will guide us through her session. Bryony, you're very welcome. Thank you for contributing today, and we look forward to what you have to say to us.
Well, hello, it's lovely to see some of you who I've met before, hang out with you in these spaces before, but also some new people. It's lovely to connect with you. So myself, I have my own coaching practice. I work with people to support them to a better relationship with themselves. I work with people who are supporting other people in life, so they've got a space for themselves. And having a safe space is really important to me. So I trained as a mental health first aid as well, and I'm now an instructor for mental health first aid. I tend to work one-to-one with people, but I also do a bit of team coaching, and I have got a group coaching program coming soon for a return to work into the workplace, specifically into universities. It's starting in from maternity and adoption leave. So I work with people in transitions, confidence, overwhelm. I'm sure much the same with a lot of the work that you guys do. But I've always loved working with the body. At university, I studied dance and psychology. I loved, fascinated by people, our behaviour, how we are, how we interact, but also how we use our bodies in different cultures, in different situations, and how we can work with that as a whole system. Through birth and through teaching around birth, I was also, it's another space I was fascinated where we've got choice, how we can access it. We really live in a culture where we're, some of us, not everyone here, but this British culture, we're brought up to live in our heads quite a lot, and there's so much more to us. So as human beings, like in the rest of nature, we're whole integrated intelligent systems, and we can learn to work with and manage our energy and our state and ourselves. Which means we can open up our potential. We're thinking about exploring potential this week. We can open up that even more when we work with the whole system. So this is what we're working on, dropping out of our heads and tapping into our whole body intelligence. And I was really lucky. I took the opportunity last year in terms of my own CPD. I did the physical intelligence for coaches training through Physical Intelligence Institute. So look, the science that I'm going to bring into this has come out of that training and my learning through that. And again, like the work we do with coaching is a lot around opening up our awareness so that we create space for wiser choice. And from there, we have more power, more resilience, more access to our potential. So that's what we're going to be looking at throughout, really, while we're exploring together today. So I'm going to go through, I'll introduce a bit of science into the mix, but it's little bits. I'll be talking about, how we can work with our hormone state, but also in terms of that awareness where we've got choice, and bringing some tips and things that I use within coaching to explore our own potential, but also with myself as well, working on myself. So the first bit, looking at some awareness, I'm going to invite you into a bit of exploration for yourself. So I'm going to ask you to just maybe push back a bit from the desk. You might want to stand up. You might want to stay sitting. You might want to turn away from the screen so you don't need to look at the screen. I'm going to invite you in a moment either to close your eyes or to soften your gaze, look out the window, whichever's most comfortable for you. So find and this is working on awareness of our physical state and our physical responses. So I'm going to invite you to find a neutral position, either on your feet if you're standing up, or where you're settled if you're sitting down still. Find a neutral position where you find some balance. Either soften your gaze or close your eyes, whichever's most comfortable to you, for you. Take a moment to notice how you are in this moment. Take a moment to greet your body, your whole self. Take yourself to whatever neutral is today for you. It varies, doesn't it? And then I'm going to say a word, and I'm going to ask you to stay curious as to see what your response is to that word. The word is politics. When you hear the word politics, what's the response in your body? Get curious. Turn the volume up on those sensations. Notice where in your body that response is. Notice how you're holding it. And then I'm going to ask you to shake that one off. I'm going to bring another one in a moment. Come back to whatever neutral is today for you. So the next word I'm going to offer you is duvet. What's your response to the word duvet? Then notice what happens in your body, where it's happening. Perhaps turn the volume up on it and notice how it feels. And then again, shake that one off. Come back to your neutral of today. Thunder here going on. I don't know if you can hear it. The next thing I'm going to invite you to do, this last little bit of this exercise, is to think about something that you're wrangling with in life. And as you're holding that in your thoughts, notice where you're holding that in your body. Notice how it feels. Notice the impact on you. And perhaps think about what you could do with that information. And I'm going to ask you to take a breath, come back to your neutral. When you're ready, wriggle anything you need to wriggle, and then open your eyes. Back to our gathering. I'm wondering if there's maybe one person, maybe two, who would be willing to share something at keeping it safe for yourself, something around the information that just popped up and something you might be able to do.
It was the subtle little physical reactions to those different words. So the politics in my head was, well, politicians, and then office politics and some bit of amusement around that. The duvet was a bit of comforting and slowing down, but also the wrestle that you have when you're changing a duvet and trying to get everything in the corners and things. And the wrangling bit, I really noticed a physical response to that. I became a bit sort of tenser, and my hands were moving, which they didn't do so much with the others. So I was quite intrigued by the physical reactions to what is basically 3 words.
Yeah, I think for me, it was rather than trying to sort of associate with images or making sense of the word, it was just a sense of feeling. And when you were asking us where in our body it was, so with politics, I was like, I got a rant. I could just feel my rant in my face, rather than associating it with anything or anybody. And the duvet one, I just didn't want to come out of at all, because it was just like super relaxed in seconds. And I was there. And the last one was really interesting, because actually the feelings that I connected with are feelings that have been with me this morning, but I hadn't really associated them with that thing, if that makes sense. I've been doing something else, and it's like, ooh, that's what that is. That's what I'm feeling this morning. So that was quite interesting.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, both of you. So this is the thing, our bodies are full of information. So when we're doing work on ourselves, checking in with ourselves, how we're doing, working on a project that we might be wrangling with, or a conversation, whatever it is, or whether we're coaching someone to explore their potential, looking for this information in the body can be really key, and it can shift things further, quicker. So if they're talking about something, we check in with what's going on in the body, there's information there that might be a blocker, or it might be something we can work with. But also using things like duvet as a different perspective. You know, if we were to take to that place and then have the conversation, so once we've got a different physical state. So this is what we're going to move on to, thinking about the awareness of noticing what our physical state is and being more in connection with that, but also in terms of exploring our potential, being able to shift to a different state, the one of our choosing that will serve us better for a particular situation or particular phase, conversation, whatever it is. I'll go through this slowly. So this is the performance pathway that's been created by the Physical Intelligence Institute. So on the axes, we've got 4 different hormones. On the vertical axis, at the top, we've got adrenaline. So adrenaline is it's about our acceleration in life. It's about excitement and fear. On the other end of that axis, we've got acetylcholine, which I've done a lot of practicing saying, and it still trips me up. So this is about our balance and renewal. So there's quite a shift in difference. And obviously, our bodies are an exquisite orchestration of hormones. They're incredibly complex. And it is more complex than this model gives us. But this model, I think, is great for helping us to understand how the balance of hormones shifts and impacts our mood, our state, how we show up, all those kinds of things. On the horizontal axis, on the right-hand side, we've got cortisol, and of course this is to do with our arousal and working with threat. And on the other side, it is DHEA, which is to do with our vitality and stamina. Now, none of these hormones are good or bad. There's no good or bad about them, but it's about the mix and the balance of them and how that serves us. So when our cortisol is really high, the impact it has on other hormones is really noticeable. So our dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and testosterone go down. So testosterone is about our risk tolerance, how much risk we can tolerate, and also our confidence. So when our cortisol is really high, it really knocks our confidence down. Serotonin is about our status and our happiness. Oxytocin, I'm sure you know, the love hormone. It's all about connection and building trust with people. And dopamine's about our motivation and reward, those kinds of things. So if we're in a state of high cortisol and adrenaline, we'll end up potentially in frustration, anxiety, worry. But if we can shift ourselves across, as it says across the bottom, from the right of this model to the left, it's transformational. We can end up in enthusiasm, motivation, passion. And one example of this, so in terms of adrenaline, if we're quite high in adrenaline, excitement and fear, we get very similar physical reactions. So our heart will start pumping faster and we might get a bit fidgety and we'll, you know, our breathing might get shorter. It's the meaning we attach to those sensations. So for me, doing this talk with you, I get a bit nervous beforehand. I get to choose if that's an excitement and those nerves mean something because it matters to me, or if I'm going to get fearful. But we have to have the awareness first to be able to get to that point of choice. So this model has actually been, it's a hormonal model laid upon an already existing model. It's about our energy. So I think I'm saying this wrong, but Luhr and Schwartz had this model. So the top right is our survival zone, really important for certain situations in life. We have to survive sometimes, but staying in there has a detrimental impact on us. The burnout zone, we can end up if we're in the survival zone for too long. And if we can recognize that we're there, we can choose what to do to shift out of it. And then the recovery zone, performance zone are really important zones to be in and really useful in terms of exploring our potential, having the balance and shift between those and choosing when and how we are there. Again, really useful thing to do. So that's just a little bit of science for you around this, but choosing how, so noticing, so thinking about the other day I was going to do a presentation in the room in front of people, and I had hit, well, it was a couple of weeks ago now, but I'd hit all of the traffic cones in Leeds that I wasn't at the time aware were there. So I'd ended up being a bit later. I had less time to set up, wasn't sure about the tech when I got there, all those kinds of things. So I was kind of in the survival zone. So thinking about what I could do to shift across into my performance zone, thinking about perhaps a moment of recovery for myself first, and then going into the performance zone and using my energy to be able to do well and be well and serve the people I was, you know, working with, rather than staying in the survival zone and working from that place. So again, it's about the choice. Once we're aware of those different states and what it feels like for us personally, and we can work with our physical intelligence, our system, we can choose to take the lead. Rather than having it run us, we get to choose to take the lead. So we're gonna, I'm gonna just share 3 different tools that we can use to be able to make those shifts that we want, to come to the place that we want to be for any given moment or time. Even if it's just as much as we can to look after ourselves through something that might be bringing quite a lot of cortisol or whatever, more than is normally healthy. So we're going to look a bit of breathing. We're going to talk about breathing, movement and visualization. And these may well be things that you're using in coaching anyway, if you're coaching people or in your own work in life. So in terms of breathing first, most of us just don't breathe properly in life. For some reason, we're intelligent creatures, but these days we just don't do it properly. Whether we're doing that through just not making sure we're practicing breathing properly, or through stress. So I know in stress, I certainly breathe shorter. If I'm particularly busy in life, I'll be having shorter, quicker breath. This restricts our diaphragm, when our diaphragm is restricted, it increases the cortisol. We end up with numbed emotions, and emotions are really important for information. There are energy and motion. We experience emotions in life, and we need to. Also, with a restricted diaphragm, we release toxins into our body, which can impact, in terms of the long term, it will cause inflammation, which shows up in various different ways in our physicality, in our bodies. But it also decreases our ability to think, to be flexible, to see possibilities, to be open to change. And those are all things that, if we're going to explore our potential, we need to be able to do. So we need to be able to breathe well. And there's various different exercises we can do. You may well have come across paced breathing. So that's counting maybe for 4 and 4 for breathing in and out, and practicing those as exercises. Dr. Justin Kennedy, back in 2012, did a study using paced breathing with, he worked with 80 investment bankers. They had some coaching sessions with him, but they also did 40 minutes paced breathing every day. And their stress levels came down by 42%, and their cognitive thinking went up by 62%, which is pretty significant. So I'm going to introduce one breathing exercise that we can do for ourselves or with people that we're working with, whether that's coaching or other kind of supportive ways. If you're willing to stand up, it would be really useful, but you can absolutely do this sitting down if you're not able to, or it doesn't feel comfortable for you to do so. So just find whichever position you want to take, able to take. So again, if you are standing, make sure you're balanced on both feet. If you're sitting, again, make sure you're balanced on both hips as much as you're able to. And what we're going to do, first of all, I'm going to ask you to put up one of your arms straight up, and then put your other arm onto, I don't know if you can see me, I'm a bit short of how I set up, onto your side, onto your ribs. And then you're going to, keeping your hips stable, hang over and stretch over. Just a little amount. And then you can rub it up and down your ribs to stretch it out a little bit. And then leaving your hand there on your ribs, just going to take some breaths. So breathing in, a nice long one, really into that rib, and then breathing out. And then again, breathing into your right rib, breathing in. And then breathing out. And then coming back up to neutral and putting your arm down, noticing the difference between the two sides. And then putting the other arm up, put your hand on your rib, leaning over. And then if you want to, rubbing up and down to help stretch it out a little bit. And then placing your hand on your rib, we're going to breathe into your rib cage on that side. So breathing in. And then breathing out. And then breathing in. And breathing out. And bringing yourself up, dropping your arm. And then just take a minute to notice what feels different. What's shifted? So for me, I feel a bit brighter, a little bit more awake, feel a bit more expansive. Again, there'll be different hormones going on there in terms of particularly oxytocin. When we expand in the chest, we release oxytocin, and that's the connection, the trust, that positivity. When we breathe well, we are altering our inner state of being. We can make more change from this place. Or out, when we breathe out, really, we're releasing that acetylcholine, which is about our renewal. So it can really, if we're thinking about coaching someone, if we get them to do a long out breath, we might be able to bring them down a bit, or help them to bring themselves down a bit, if that's really going to serve them in that time, if they need to bring some balance in, some renewal in to approach this conversation. It also releases the diaphragm, as I was talking about, holding the diaphragm, all the impact it has, not being able to think well, not being able to be open to change and possibility. When we release the diaphragm, it releases DHEA, which is about our vitality and stamina. And we can do that with deep breathing out, we can in and out, we can do it with laughing, with crying, stretching, that opening up and talking, which of course we invite people to do a lot in the coaching space. So just from talking, it's pumping the diaphragm and releasing that, all that's being held there. Our in-breath, apparently the French actually call inspire, which is about inspire. It's, if you think about it, you could take a moment to try this now, but just taking a big in-breath, it shifts something. It's pumping adrenaline to the heart, so it's lifting us. So there are small nuances we can do for ourselves. If we're thinking about sat down to do a little piece of work or something, or we're working with a coachee and they're a bit stuck with something, getting them to stand up and just stand there and take a really good in-breath and a really good out-breath and asking that question again, we might get a whole different answer. So think about how we can use that breath for ourselves. Just in a moment, we can change things with breathing, but also with that practiced breathing every day, having a breathing exercise for ourselves. In terms of movement, and we're just going to touch on this slightly, we're thinking about our stances. And I'm sure you've come across some of the work around, you know, the Superman or Wonder Woman pose with our hands on our hips and our chest expanded, power poses, I think they're called. Thinking about, you know, again, if we coaching someone around going into an interview or a presentation, getting them to imagine standing at the door in a power pose, or asking them how they want to stand, you know, letting them lead it. Similarly, if we're getting them to take a breath before they answer, getting them to just stand up to answer the question can shift things. And every time we move, we're sending positive messages to the brain if we're moving in a proactive way. So because we're physical creatures, we need to move a lot more than most of us do. So through coaching, we can help that shifting and exploring more the potential through movement about how that person wants to hold themselves, how they want to be, or how you want to be, how you want to show up. In terms of the hormones, there's different things we can do, like power pose. So we can, if you push your fists together, or if you prefer prayer hands, whichever works for you, we're clenching the muscles. By flexing those muscles, we're increasing irisin, which is the hope molecule. So we're bringing more hope into the way that we're thinking. But we're also raising testosterone and cortisol in a really good balance, and adrenaline. So we're improving our determination. So if we're trying to shift ourselves into, right, yes, I'm going to do this, you know, flexing our muscles and getting to that point can really help shift it. And the other one that I mentioned, the expansion, that, you know, like the power poses, expansion, opening up our chest, bringing that oxytocin, we can bring in pride, connection, that openness. So if we're working with someone or on ourselves and we want to bring more pride around something or connection with something or other people, then that expansion can be a really useful thing. So there's so many different ways we can use our body and move it. And the other one I'm just going to touch on is visualization. Visualization, certainly as coaches, is something we do a lot. What is it you want to work on? Where do you want to get to with this? Where's your goal? Tell me what that's going to be like. By getting someone to actually go there and be there, there is now science behind the importance of visualization, how it can shift us to actually make that happen and actually go the journey and find our way with it. So that's why it's so important to get people to visualize the state they want to be in and then bring this other stuff. How will you be walking when you're at that place? How will you be holding yourself? Getting them to stand up and do that, or lie down, you know, however position they say they're going to be in their physicality, and locking it in, getting them to hold it, take it a bit further, and practice it, live it. So we're actually, it's an imprint, it's building up muscle memory for our bodies. Okay, so I've whizzed through quite a lot of content in there, offered you out a bit of information around hormones, a bit of information around breathing, movement and visualization. So what I'm going to invite you to do now is I'm going to go into breakout rooms in a couple of minutes. Okay, so you're going to have a bit of time to talk about what's different for you now. how could some of this knowledge, whether it's new or a reminder, how could this impact your potential? But also, if you are coaching people, how could you use this information as a coach to help your clients explore their potential further? Welcome back, everyone. So we've got a bit of time to hear from each group.
I don't mind sharing some things. So,
Lovely.
I mean, as people may hear about in a Coaching York podcast to be released at some point soon, I'm a big fan of breath, and I have used big fan of breath. I'm a big fan of this kind of intentional breathing in order to calm people down and focus. And I have used it in coaching sessions when people are so agitated it's really blocking thinking. And would you like to try out an exercise and then done a few minutes of this kind of breath work to get them into a very different place? And it's really unlocked things. And I suppose one of the things that we were talking through in our pair was, given I know it's so powerful, am I prepared to kind of work it in as a kind of regular part of start of the session, or do I want to keep it in the toolkit as emergencies only? Because there are so many other parts of my life where actually we do start with a warm up and we do some breathing and we arrive. I had a coach this morning who arrived at a session still eating breakfast. And so that kind of, actually, how do we mark we're beginning, and could we do something that physiologically gets us in the best possible state, is a really interesting question.
And I think every aspect, the breathing, the movement, the visualization, we kind of had an appreciation of all the three in the coaching relationship, but not necessarily all tested out. But also it was interesting, I think, for both of us, we drew on for example, other things that we do for ourselves. So yoga, for example. So when you spoke about breath, it takes a few decades to realize how important breath is, but just how that I found it very helpful thinking about how, to slow down, because I use free writing as a way to kind of stop a client talking non-stop. Just as a pause, but I'm also thinking about now whether to introduce the breathing thing and whether this person will think it's really odd, or, so how, picking up on what was just said, how and when you introduce it is quite interesting. And the other thing that I was thinking about for myself was about the visualization, which I think is a helpful reminder for when you're thinking about how you've been working in a certain area for many decades and then things change, which I think is what's facing a lot of us at the moment, post-COVID and everything else. So so lots of really good things, personal and thinking about, I do a lot of small group work. So it's like coaching and one-to-one and in small groups. Shifting energy, getting people to talk when they're silent, that kind of thing. Yeah,
Fascinating.
Yeah, so it's great, thank you.
Wonderful. And yeah, I agree, yoga is one of those forms of physical movement, strengthening, agility and all that, to be able to take care of ourselves in our different states and to be able to shift, isn't it? It's very conscious in that way. Yeah, and I love that there's another how. Okay, how are we going to input this? So it'd be good to hear from other groups, but also if there are any thoughts around the how, but not necessarily, but not just that. So please, someone else from another group.
So in our group, we all absolutely love those three tools: the breathing, the movement, the visualization. And the conversation went to how using movement in outside of an office, outside of four walls, into a natural environment, and how that could create, boost really divergent thinking.
Yeah.
I think we also spoke about how the space that you're in is really important. So if you're not out in nature, but you're in another space, how there's that, one of the other people in the group was speaking about the kind of dynamics of, are you in control of the space, or is the space in control of you? And we were talking about visualization as well, and how that can be very powerful.
Yeah, and I think you're right in what you said, but I think we were saying the outdoor space creates an opportunity for diverse discussion, for topics to flow naturally, and one could teach complicated topic using nature and almost teaching unconsciously, getting, like using the analogy of a river for flow, the mountain as, uphill battle, and using different analogies to bring out different points, which may not be easily accessible if one is inside a building in a structured room.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. So physical environment has a huge impact on us and how we feel and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, nature's full of moving in it, like getting something right hill. Okay, let's go up there. If you're talking about a challenge and pushing yourself, there's so many different ways. And I love your analogy of the river and the flow. Checking in, we can look to nature for answers. One of my strapline is root deep, stand strong and branch out. So I'll often use the tree for myself as much as anyone else, that sort of checking in with, where am I feeling rooted today? What do I need? That kind of stuff. So there's so much depth, so much space to go with nature and with changing the physical environment, as you say. Yeah.
And it can be quite a kind of random as well, because you don't know what's going to appear. Yeah, in terms of, there could be a bird or a cloud in the sky or something, but you just don't know. It's like a smorgasbord of metaphors, because people will be drawn to certain things that resonate with them. So that was something that we were talking about in our group.
Yeah. Oh, I've got goosebumps now. I love all that, Anna. Yeah, brilliant. The world of opportunities. I love smorgasbord. Wonderful. Alex, are you going to say something?
You asked about how we use it. And as someone that struggles somewhat with embodiment, I thought some really, really useful, easy things that I can do to bring that into my coaching. So I really appreciate when you said, if you're like this, what perspective does that give? That's a kind of entry level bit of embodiment I can use with any client. Secondly, kind of asking the client to stand and see what their answer is from that place. Again, really easy stuff to use. And I think the third part I'm taking away is the slowing down and focus, being present. That when you were asking us to breathe, I stopped doing the email that's over there. It happens, and I suspect clients occasionally will see an email pop up and get drifting away. But it takes me away from that and slowing things down. And they're all stuff that analytically I can get on board with easily and start introducing to my analytically minded clients that may or may not be into embodiment. So I think it's a great kind of gateway drug to embodiment.
Wonderful. And I thank you for bringing that up, Alex, because it is, we're all at a different point with the check-in with our body and how much we access. And obviously that's going to ebb and flow in life as well. That's something that came up in our group. I don't know, John, if you're willing to share the analogy from the Gulliver's Travel.
Oh, yes, willingly. My starting point really was how little I'm aware of my body most of the time, not just breathing, but the whole shebang. And I was reminded of a character in Gulliver's Travels. There's a group of people who are highly intelligent, and they wander along completely oblivious of everything. They're completely cerebral. And in order to stop them running into the houses and trees and things, they have a servant who runs along beside them with a pig's bladder on a stick with dried peas in it. And if there's something that dangerous they're about to hit, then the servant hits the highly intelligent person with this bladder, and they wake up and they realize they're not supposed to rush into this thing. And it struck me as a really uncomfortably good analogy for me, really. I spent a lot of my time just thinking entirely in my head and not aware of what's going on around me. But that for me worked, sprang from what Bryony was saying and the importance of being deliberately conscious and aware of breathing and everything that goes with it and all the chemicals. And then beyond that, your physical presence.
I love this. So it made me think, yeah, okay, so we need to find what our pig's bladder is to walk us over the head when we need to listen to our bodies and not our brains. So yeah, I love that. So because it is, Alex, you know, if we're coaching people or working on ourselves or whatever we're doing, everyone's at different places. And I was thinking, actually, Tom, you came into our conversation because I was using the analogy of lighting boards and sounding boards with the different knobs on it. There's so many different types of intelligence we talk about: physical intelligence, emotional, creative intelligence, IQ, you know, and they're all different places for each of us. So it's about how we play with that and shift and find our way with it, I think.
With our group, there was the 4 of us in our group, and I think we all resonated with those when you said those words, and about how we actually felt when we were thinking about facing our challenges, and the real physical shift in our bodies was had very much of an impact on everybody, particularly me as well. But I think we all appreciated the breathing as well, and how some of the people already use it in their coaching practice. But for me, I think I'm very much a solution focused coach, and I'm always looking at the practical things, the thinking and the doing things. And if anything, I probably in my career I've deflected a bit away from the emotional stuff unless I really need to. But actually, I think I'm changing as I get older as well. And we talked about how our bodies change as we get older, and different things, and why it's so interesting now to be educating ourselves and making us more aware of these changes that happen, and some of those things are happening because we're getting older as well. Yeah, and you know, people were on a journey. Everybody was on a journey about educating themselves in there, and I think we agreed that to use it in our coaching practice, we've got to be more aware of it ourselves first. We've got to look after ourselves first and foremost before we can start looking after our coachees.
Yeah, and it's the case with all the things, isn't it? We start here first with us. Yeah, brilliant. I love that. And it is, you bring something to mind, but yeah, it's about working with our system rather than either ignoring part of it or not connecting with it or battling with it, especially when you talk about the changes. These changes come, they happen to us, don't they? And then but we can actually, you know, it's again like with all this, a lot of the stuff we do in coaching or with other explorations in life. Okay, this is happening, get curious. What can I do? What does this mean to me? What's the impact? And actually be curious.
I was just curious really as whether anyone's got experience of the feeling first rather than the thoughts. So while we were asked to pay attention to words and then we had a response to it, actually whether there's anything about, so I've done some sort of like meditation work and being aware of feelings in my body, but not intellectually really understanding what that's about or what that problem's about, and whether anyone's got an experience of that coming up first. And then we explore what that's about rather than identifying the word first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolute sense. Great question.
That's really interesting that you said that, Karen, because when Bryony was introducing the session and she was giving us those words, when you said politics, I just had, I thought of spiky. Yeah. That's the image that I had. And so that, I think that's quite a sort of kinesthetic response. And so people will respond depending on what their preferences are.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that I'm wondering about is like so we talked about it a little bit in our group where we might have tension or we might have discomfort in a part of our body, but we don't necessarily always associate that with what's going on in our lives. We just think it's a physicality thing.
Yeah.
And actually sometimes is it worth going, oh, I've got a pain in my shoulder, what's that about, where's that coming from? That, I guess that's the curiosity, and I am doing some studying around this as well, so I am really like just attuned to it at the minute.
Yeah, I find all this fascinating. I think you're absolutely right, and these things do come up. I'm going to invite Beresford. Are you?
Yeah, I was interested in what Karen was saying from a marketing point of view, because the psychology is that people buy on emotion and then they use reason logic to justify why they're doing it. So then it seems as though the feeling is coming first, but we may not always notice the feeling because we act, I don't know, unconsciously, and then we spend the time trying to justify why we did what we do, not realizing we're driven by emotions primarily, then we justify. So I thought I'll throw that in.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. Jeff.
Yeah, it's just a quick thought on this. There's a bit of the brain that focuses very much on speech, and another bit of the brain which doesn't have a bit of speech to it, but does have language. And I find it very helpful to think about the difference between speech and language. So even though you don't necessarily articulate something through speech, you can still be talking about it. And there are other forms of language that we use. And I think that sense of intuition, it's, yes, we interrogate the world through logic and science, but we also interrogate the world through intuition, and we have understanding through that as well. And so, yeah, just distinguishing those two ideas, speech and language, I find it's quite a helpful thing to think about.
I use a lot of creative sort of techniques in the coaching that I'm doing, because I find that a lot of the time someone can't necessarily articulate something, and they don't have to be a fantastic artist, even just words or squiggles on a page, and just talking about what these things represent, what the space between the things represents, all that kind of thing can help people articulate things that, or bring to the surface to sort of explore a bit, things that it's very difficult for them to put into language or words.
Yeah, there's all these different ways. I can see some smiles happening across the screen of people that, there's so many different ways in. And I find, as a coachee, there's quite often times my coach or supervisor will ask me a question and I'll say, I don't actually have the words, but I can feel it in my body. I know what I'm here. And then we work from that place, even if I can't actually speak to what it is. Or I'll say, right, I'll just take some time to know this, because this is what I want to have more of, or whatever it is. But I think this point that Karen's brought about, there's stuff going on in our body and we don't necessarily know what it is, and getting to know and connect with our physical intelligence more gives us more access to that choice and what we can do, how we can look after ourselves, show up, find our potential, and help other people if we're in positions of doing that, whether it's coaching or something else, to do that, because we do hold things. I had one really, that exercise that I took you through, I did it a few years pre-pandemic, a few years ago, at an event around menopause, and I did it with the group, and it was after someone came up to me, she said, it's on my shoulders, I am carrying this on my shoulders. She had no idea, but there was something going on, that she had this weight that she was carrying. So it can be really useful information, whether in that moment we probably can't answer it in that moment. It's going to be a rippling for some time potentially. But yeah, so I'm aware that we've got just a few minutes left. Just thinking about, if we think about the people who do this really well, so just going to bring up a couple of examples. Usain Bolt, we have a look about what he was doing at that time. Every time he went out on the racetrack, he would play with the crowd, but what he's doing right there, he's flexing his muscles, he's in an expansive pose, so it's trust, but he's flexing his muscles, he's raising his own inner state of status, of risk, of tolerance, of confidence. So he's using his physicality to be able to do that. And of course, when he ran a rep, one straight away, despite the fact that he was so confident he was going to win, there's still celebration. And this is another thing that we can use is when we're working with someone or ourselves, that we've managed something, we approached that conversation, and we approached it in a way that we wanted to show off. We've done that, to use our bodies to celebrate that, because then we get to grow more from that place. We're becoming more of who we want to be and bringing more of our potential. And again, it's that expansion pose. There's lots of muscle flexing going on because he's in action, but it's bringing with the adrenaline more of that oxytocin, and all this other balance of hormones that's helping to have more of that in life. The other person I thought of, I thought of this person because when I said to someone, I brought the example earlier of going in for an interview, a conversation. Okay, you're standing at the door, how do you want to stand? And this person said to me, I want my hands in my pockets and I want to be standing like Christine Lagarde. So I CEO of the International Monetary Fund. I think she's in a world that is really high powered. It's incredibly masculine. It's very, you know, powerful. There's really important conversations going on. The way she holds her body, she's, you know, taking her place for those conversations. She's open. Again, it's the shifting the hormones, but also the connection, the openness opposes it, brings us into connection with other people. So it's just another example of someone else who uses their physical intelligence in terms of the place and the purpose that they have in the world, the paths that they've chosen. And of course, we're all so different. We've all got different purposes, paths, chapters, things going on, challenges, all kinds of things. But it's thinking about how we want to start playing with a bit more our physical intelligence. So that's it. Thank you very much for being here, for joining me. I love this conversation. There's always so much to learn. I think, you know, as humans, as part of nature, it's just fascinating. It's wonderful. It's awesome. And it's been wonderful to hear your thoughts, your inputs, your wisdoms in the conversation. So thank you.